Some people seem to say that really Britain couldn't survive, couldn't do okay outside the European Union. I don't think that is true. Let's be frank, Britain is an amazing country.
What the alternative would look like
to
the trade deals we have with Europe and those deals around the world, and why you are so confident that there will suddenly be a blossoming of free trade when we know it is incredibly difficult to do, and it will not be in the interest of several of our trading partners to do those deals with us.
I will tell you very briefly what the alternative to being in the European Union is. The alternative to being in the European Union is not being in the European Union. And it may surprise you, but most of the world is not in the European Union. And it may also surprise you that most of the world is doing a lot better than most of the European Union.
I want to just make the point that you don't seem to have understood, which is that these trade agreements are totally irrelevant. They won't make any difference to anything. We don't need any trade agreements. What we need is to get out of a protectionist trade arrangement, namely the EU customs union. Right. And everyone says how wonderful it is to be inside the EU, but they for them forget that it's actually a highly protectionist organization, not just in agriculture, but also in manufacturing. And it's infinitely preferable to be in the global market under conditions of free trade. And that will give us huge gains. So the trade issue, far from being a great negative in terms of leaving the EU, is a huge positive. And what happens is that people think it's totally negative because we can't negotiate these trade agreements. But they've totally misunderstood the irrelevance of these trade agreements to our situation in the global market.
Are you suggesting that from now on, you and others who feel like you should continue a parliamentary struggle to get Britain out?
But of course, this is like September 1938. In September, October 1938, I'm sure that the vast majority of Neville Chamberlain had gone to the country. He would have swept the country for an act of abnegation. But the very same people, within 12 months, when they saw behind the facade, when they penetrated to the realities, stood up to fight for the continued existence of our nation. And that's what will happen.
And when do you see our 1940 coming, when we're going to stand alone?
Well, let's have 1939 first, when we decide that we have to fight. You see, I simply do not believe, although, and I make no complaint of the pro-marketeers, particularly people like Edward Heath and Peter Kirk. They've been beyond criticism in that they have made it perfectly clear that to remain part of the common market is to renounce national status for Britain. They say the nation state is obsolete and we are to recognize it.
Who are you going to get to support you in your continuing parliamentary struggle to get Britain out of the common market, Mr. Powell?
Well, as the House of Commons, week by week, has to debate the consequences of being in the common market, it will, as it tends to do, filter through to wider and wider areas that they were rightly told by people like Edward Heath that this did in fact mean that they would become a province in a new state. Well, now, I do not believe that when that is realized, that it will be assented to. I am still convinced that the people of this country cannot be absorbed into a European state.
May I just point out that Wiltshire has said yes, and Oxfordshire has said yes, and could I point out to Mr. Powell that he did say, as he has confirmed, that we will not go into the common market, and we did go into the common market. And are you not just as wrong now as you were then?
No, sir, the British people do not mean it, because they still have not been able to credit the implications of being in the common market. They still think they will be a nation. They still think they will govern and tax and legislate for themselves. They are mistaken. It's not the fault of many of the pro-marketeers that they are mistaken, but it is a thing so incredible to them that I'm not inclined to blame them overmuch. But they will learn.
Do you think that I brought Mr. Whitelaw in because he came up after you come into the studio and we wanted to have a talk with him, but could I ask you whether you think that the anti-market cabinet ministers should now resign on the grounds that they cannot possibly, as some people would think, not cannot possibly wholeheartedly carry out the job of taking this country into its full European partnership?
Well, I think broadly, yes. I don't see how Mr. Benn can possibly continue as a member of a cabinet, having said what he has said in the last few weeks about membership of the community. If he believes, as apparently he does, that between 500,000 and 750,000 jobs have been lost as a result of British membership, I don't see how he can remain a member of a government which is cooperating within Europe.
Well, my view on Europe is very simple. We had this bloody war which cost millions of lives, and then we had to decide how we reacted to Europe. And I took the view that having fought them, we should now work with them and cooperate. And that was my first thought about it. Then when I saw how the European Union was developing, it was very obvious that what they had in mind was not democratic. I mean, in Britain you vote for a government and therefore the government has to listen to you, and if you don't like it you can change it. But in Europe all the key positions are appointed, not elected. The Commission, for example, all appointed, not one of them elected. And the way that Europe has developed is that the bankers and the multinational corporations have got very powerful positions, and if you come in on their terms they will tell you what you can and cannot do, and that is unacceptable. And my view about the European Union has always been, not that I'm hostile to foreigners, but I'm in favour of democracy. And I think out of this story we'll have to find an answer, because I certainly don't want to live in hostility to the European Union, but I think they're building an empire there, and they want us to be a part of that empire, and I don't want that. Now, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's my argument.
Three and a half years ago, when they were urging us to go in, oh, what a campaign it was. You've got to get in to get on, was the slogan of that day. £5 or £6 a week better off for Britain if we can only get into the common market. All the goodies were spread out, and Donald Stokes of Leyland buying one-page advertisements saying, all we need is a great domestic market of 250 million, and we will sweep Europe. And you know what has happened, and this is the one significance of the trade figure. I'm not arguing who cares about the actual details of the size of it. That doesn't matter, it's the trend. The trend. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we were almost in balance with the common market countries. What's happened since? 500 million down in 72, 1,000 million in 73, 2,000 million in 74, running now at the rate of 2,400 million this year. Don't you see what that's going to do to the prosperity of this country? You can't go on borrowing that. Add to that the burdens I mentioned a moment ago, and we are under great threat. We're in peril at the present time, and the country must know. Therefore, now what do they say? What is the message that comes now? No longer to tell the British people about the goodies that lie there. No longer that. That won't wash, will it? Because the evidence will no longer support it. So the message that comes out is fear, fear, fear. Fear because you won't have any food. Fear of unemployment. Fear that we've somehow been so reduced as a country that we can no longer, as it were, totter about in the world independent as a nation. And a constant attrition of our morale, a constant attempt to tell us that what we have, and what we have is not only our own achievement, but what generations of Englishmen have helped us to achieve, is not worth a damn. The kind of laughter that greeted the early references that I made, that what was involved was the transfer of the whole of our democratic system to others. Not a damn. Well, I tell you what we now have to face in Britain, what the whole argument is about, now that the fraud and the promise has been exposed. What it's about is basically the morale and the self-confidence of our people. We can shape our future. We are 55 million people. If you look around the world today, I listened to Gough Whitlam and his 14 million Australians, and he trades heavily with Japan. very fond of the Australians. But do you think he's going to enter into a relationship with Japan, which gives Japan the right to make the laws in Australia? Do you think Canada, 22 million of them, and to the south a great and friendly nation? Yes, they are. But do you think Canada is going to allow its laws to be written by the 200 million people in some union in America? No, no, of course not. The whole thing is an absurdity. And therefore I urge you to reject it. I urge you to say no to this motion. And I urge the whole British country to say no on Thursday in the referendum.
You claim the European Union could cause armed conflict if we leave. You could put a bomb under our economy if we leave, the Prime Minister's words, hurt pensioners, collapse house prices. Why are you risking all that with a referendum?
Look, I don't think it's ever a risk in a democracy to ask the people. And all my lifetime, this issue of Britain's membership of the European Union has hung over our economy and our security, and I think it's right that the people decide. You know, I think Britain can be one of the great success stories of the 21st century. We've got the talent, the drive, the connections around the world. But if we vote to leave, then we lose control. We lose control of our economy. And if you lose control of your economy, you lose control of everything. And that's not a price worth paying.
So the message that comes out is fear, fear, fear. Fear because you won't have any food. Fear of unemployment. Fear that we've somehow been so reduced as a country that we can no longer, as it were, totter about in the world, independent as a nation.
My argument is not going to be in any way that Britain can't succeed outside the European Union. Of course we could. We're a great country.
The British people do not mean it because they still have not been able to credit the implications of being in the common market. They still think they will be a nation. They still think they will govern and tax and legislate for themselves. They are mistaken. It's not the fault of many of the pro-marketeers that they are mistaken, but it is a thing so incredible to them that I'm not inclined to blame them overmuch. But they will learn.